My name is Eric Larsen. I'm a polar explorer and an expedition guide. I focus on expeditions to really cold places. Most recently, I completed an unsupported, unaided journey to the geographic North Pole. My ultimate goal is to connect people to places, and cold places in particular. And you know, I'm kind of on a singular mission to help make cold cool. To let people know that cold places, snow and ice are really important parts of our planet. You know, if you look at specifically like the Arctic and Antarctica, very few people understand what those places are like. And so, you know, a big part of my mission is to do these unique expeditions to these places, tell the story of our journey, and in doing so, tell the story of the place to help people better understand what those places are like. Because I do feel like people have a lot of misconceptions about what they're like. People think about the North Pole or the South Pole, they think about just a big white sheet of paper with nothing there. And in reality, that's very, very incorrect. The Arctic Ocean is a unique environment in the sense that the ice there is floating on water. It's constantly moving, and it's broken up into these sheets of ice that can be several kilometers across, or they can just be a few meters across. And they're constantly moving depending on the winds, the tides, and the ocean currents of the ocean. And so you're traveling across a surface that looks like it could be land, but in reality it's just ice floating on water, and so it can crack apart, and there's an open section of water that we might have to swim across, or those pans of ice can collide together and form what look like mountain ranges made out of ice. Constantly changing. The unique thing about the North Pole journey is two people can start out at the same spot on the same day, and their routes to get to the pole are completely different. But not that many people even make that journey to the pole. It's the hardest expedition on the planet, I feel like. And Antarctica is another very unique place. It's a very extreme environment. It's the coldest place on our planet, it's the windiest place on our planet, it's the driest place on our planet. And the North Pole expedition is hard, and so it's a unique challenge. Antarctica is a beautiful, vast place that's very comfortable to camp in. So they're both different. You know, picking a North Pole or the South Pole is like picking your favorite child. You can't do it. The North and South Poles are polar opposites, not only in name, but also in just their physical characteristics. The North Pole is an ocean. The ice is floating on water. And the South Pole is a continent. And so all the ice is piled up on land. The elevation at the geographic South Pole is roughly 3,000 meters. The elevation at the North Pole is about 3 meters. And so two very different places. The Antarctic is a desert. The Arctic Ocean is a very humid environment. So even though there is ice in both places, they're very, very different. Polar bears in the Arctic, penguins in Antarctica. You know, I could go on and on about the differences. My concern is when we are on our expeditions, generally we're pulling all of our food and supplies with us. Basically everything that we need to live and survive, we bring along with us in a sled. And so you start adding up that weight, and it's pretty heavy. I mean, we're eating about 1 kilo of food per person per day. You know, times 50 or 60 days. It's a very heavy sled that we're pulling. So our bodies, we're working very hard. And it doesn't matter if it's 30, 40, 50 degrees below zero. When you're working that hard, your body produces a lot of heat. And so my main priority in those conditions are not to get too warm, because when I get too hot and I sweat, all that moisture freezes instantly. And so then all my clothes are icy. They don't insulate as well. And I can't really dry them off because we don't have unlimited resources on these adventures. Everything fits in the sled, or, you know, for mountaineering, it's in our pack. So we have to be very, very mindful about how we it's our supplies on the trip, and even before that, what supplies we're bringing, so that we have the right food, that we have the right equipment, that we can fix it if it's wrong, if it breaks, which most likely it will. I have a pretty simple system. The funny thing I think about a big expedition is I pretty much take the same amount of clothes that I would take for 2 months that I would take for maybe a weekend trip. I have the base layers and shell that I'm wearing, and then a replacement layer in case those get wet or whatever, and that's basically it. So I don't change my underwear for 2 months. So we don't really take a lot. We're only wearing a couple layers in a shell because our bodies are generating so much heat. We're working really hard. When we stop, we put on a big down jacket so that we don't get too cold. But yeah, we really don't bring a lot of actual clothes with us on these trips. We're not taking showers every day. We're not, you know, changing clothes every week. I start out with one piece of layer of clothing, and I finish generally with that same clothing 2 months later. My personal record, yeah, 72 days without a shower. After about a couple weeks, you don't notice the smell anymore. It's very easy when you're out in the wilderness in a cold place, if you're hiking or if you're snowshoeing or if you're skiing, to get too warm. Oftentimes people will start out wearing a lot of clothes, and if you're moving, your body's producing a lot of heat, you start sweating, that moisture gets in your clothes, the clothes lose their ability to insulate, and you get cold. So the key is not to sweat, and one of the keys with not sweating is regulating your body temperature, and so I call it the polar striptease, and I'm constantly adjusting my layers to make sure that I'm not overheating. And so whether that's taking my hood off, taking my hat off, taking my gloves off, unzipping, zipping up, maybe I'll stop and take off my coat and maybe take off an extra layer. I'm constantly adjusting my layers. I have a few secrets. I think the first one is believe that you can be warm. I think cold is a very painful thing for people. It's painful for me too. But I think it's important to realize that with the right knowledge and with the right gear, you can be warm no matter what the situation is. I think after that, don't get too hot, surprisingly. I find a lot of people get too warm and they sweat, and that ultimately will make them cold. If you are cold, however, just put more layers on. There's no such thing as cold weather, just not enough layers. And I've been in some cold situations where I've worn many 6, 7, 8 layers of thick clothing just so that I could stay warm. Those are probably the top 3. I do use GPS to check our position in the mornings and the evenings, but GPS uses batteries, and so we're limiting the amount of supplies that we take so our sleds are lighter. And in that cold, it's much easier to use a compass for navigation because we're only navigating. We're navigating just northward, so we don't have to be super accurate throughout the day. And again, it's much easier to navigate with a needle on a compass than the electronic needle on a GPS. And we're just kind of going north, and then when we set up the camp at night, we put a waypoint in and check our mileage. When we wake up, we see where we've drifted.